Hello, I'm the Economancer, High Priest of the Economicon. Welcome back to the chapter-by-chapter exploration of Ashby's Introduction to Cybernetics. So today we're going to be jumping into Chapter 6, the Black Box. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications to stay updated. So let's unveil the mystery of the Black Box. All right, so this is Rosh Ashby, if anybody's ever wanted to know what he looks like. So, what we're going to be talking about today is obviously going to be on the black box and what this means from a cybernetics perspective. Because, again, cybernetics is the study of systems and the processes that interact with each other and their environment, and also the study of the control of those systems and how they interact with the environment. So, this is a black box. Right? It doesn't look anything crazy. So in the world of cybernetics, a black box is a system whose internal workings are unknown or disregarded. And we only focus on the inputs going into the box and then the outputs coming out. So this supposes that the process is happening inside the box. We leave those in the dark. We don't really care what's going on. This simplifies our understanding for complex systems without getting tangled up in all the intricate details. So if you don't know what's going on inside the box, so what are the internals of the box, but you observe when you press certain buttons, different sounds come out or whatever, you've applied the concept of a black box. Now, he talked about this comes from electricians or in electrical engineering and stuff like that, where they were basically given a box and they say you have to diffuse this box or else it's going to blow up. They don't know what's going on in the box, but they know that they have an input and they know what the output is. And so they have to come to the conclusion of what's in the box based on the input and the output. So this would be like there's inputs and there's outputs, and then we use the difference between the inputs and the outputs to get to what's inside or the rules. Something Dr. Wolfram talks about a lot in his work on cellular automata is along these lines of like the Rulian base or rules-based reality. So, but how does this apply to cybernetics? Well, by treating a system as a black box, we can focus on the relationships between the inputs and the outputs. And this helps us build a functional understanding of the system itself. You can use this approach for simple mechanical devices to complex phenomena such as ecosystems or even economics. So the black box approach is particularly valuable when dealing with complex systems that are hard to understand fully, such as a city's traffic flow or the national economy. By focusing on the inputs and outputs, we can build models to predict and influence behavior without getting lost in the overwhelming complexity. So if you're also thinking about this, black box modeling, which is a lot of neural networks, allows us to predict a system's behavior based on its past responses to inputs. So if every time you put water and coffee grounds into your coffee machine, you get coffee. So you can predict that the same will happen in the future. So it also helps in the control strategies. If you know the outputs you want, you can adjust your inputs to achieve this. So if you want stronger coffee, you can add more coffee grounds. Consider a thermostat as well. So if you're thinking about maintaining a room's temperature at a set point, it adjusts the output, the heating or the cooling based on the inputs, which is the current temperature. Here, the black box approach helps us in creating a control strategy, which again is kind of the whole point of cybernetics. Now, there are obviously limitations to black box modeling. The biggest one is essentially a leap of faith. We're trusting that the internal mechanisms of the system don't change over time. And if they do, our predictions could be thrown off. Like consider your car engine, right? Over time, the parts wear out. And the internal processes may change, affecting performance. If you were treating it as a black box, these changes could disrupt your prediction, right? So, for example, when it comes to a vehicle, you have a certain miles per gallon that the car is typically at. Over time, this is degraded because the parts in the system become degraded. And so where you would initially have 40 miles per gallon highway, by 100,000 miles, you're at something like 38 or 37 or something along those lines, depending on the amount of depreciation in the system stability. And if we also think about this more, the black box doesn't tell us anything about the causation or the nature of the processes inside the system. It's a tool for understanding the what, but not the why or the how. It's important to remember that while it's an important and powerful tool, it doesn't replace the need for more detailed and mechanistic models. So again, input, black box, output. So inputs and outputs. Let's consider an everyday example, a coffee machine that we were talking about earlier. You can add water and coffee as inputs, and then you get brewed coffee as an output. You don't necessarily need to know the internal mechanisms of how the machine heats the water or filters the grounds to use it. In this scenario, just simply waking up in the morning and turning on your coffee machine, it's a black box. And you could also see the human body as a black box. Doctors often don't know the intricate details of what's going inside the body, right? But they can observe symptoms, which are inputs, and prescribe treatment. Or they can observe symptoms, outputs of what's going on in the body, and then prescribe treatments, inputs, to see if that manages to line up and fix the issue. And some will say, well, you know, if you're trying to go into really high level diagnostics, even in really high level diagnostics, you're still taking what you can and still having a black box on what is true and what isn't, right? And especially when it comes to expediency, you can't, you know, do all of these tests, like all the blood tests, MRI for the full body, etc., because you're going to find so many phenomenon or, you know, differences that it will overwhelm with complexity what you're trying to get out with the inputs and outputs, where you can just prescribe treatments as inputs and see if that changes the outputs. All right, so we have absoluteness, recoding, and statistical determinacy. So Ashby explores absoluteness. Here we look at the black box with its specific inputs, recode the system, and deduce its canonical representation. This process isn't concerned with the actual physical nature of the components, but with their functional relationships. Ashby also contrasts statistical determinacy, where outcomes depend on probabilities, with strict determinacy, where the same input will always give the same output. So for an example, we can recode the system of a traffic light. So instead of having colors, let's just use numbers. 1 for red, 2 for yellow, 3 for green. The relationships, the function of the system, remain the same, even if the representations of those change. So inaccessible states, which is probably like, you're looking at this, you're like, wow, that's really weird. So inaccessible states are states that a system can't reach from its current state given the possible inputs. So if you think of a digital clock, it will never show 1367. And if it does, it's broken. By making it an inaccessible state, a more abstract example of this is a game of chess. Certain configurations of pieces are impossible or inaccessible given the game's rules. So you can't, so long as you abide by the rules, you can't do something that is incoherent to the system, because the system itself is coherent through the rules itself. All right, isomorphism and how we deduce connections. So if we're thinking about deducing connections, which is inferring the internal mechanisms from the input and output relations, which I was talking about earlier, moves into the concept of isomorphic machines. He deals with this seriously when he says that isomorphic machines are systems that have the same form or structure. Ashby introduces Bourbecky's definition and discusses relabeling states and variables. So you can imagine you have two different brands of coffee machine. They may look different and they have different buttons labeled in different languages, but the basic operation, the process of turning water and coffee grounds into brewed coffee is the same. These machines are isomorphic, right? So again, there may be some parameters that may be different and whatever, but the conclusion, the input and the output are the same. The parameters within it could be different, but we could still just determine what happens in one system. And we're going to be talking about this more when we go into homomorphic systems. Okay, homomorphic machines. So we have a many to one transformation. This would be a complex into a simple machine, right? Ashby shows when it comes to resemblance between systems, he distinguishes between isomorphic and homomorphic machines. respectively. Isomorphic machines, as the name suggests, are identical in form. Isomorphic, one form. They're so alike that if you accidentally swap them, you wouldn't notice the difference based on their behavior. Two isomorphic machines are equal in the strictest sense. So two pendulums swinging in sync, one ticking seconds and the other half seconds, are clearly similar, but not strictly isomorphic. Yet if we adjust the time scale by which we measure them, they become isomorphic, highlighting the relative nature of this concept. On the other hand, homomorphic machines share similarities but are not identical. Like two models of cars from the same manufacturer or two different algorithms solving the same problem. They may seem dissimilar at first glance, but a deeper analysis can reveal a fundamental similarity. So a many-to-one transformation can reduce a more complex system, machine M, to a form that is isomorphic with a simpler system. That's homomorphism in action. So this captures the essence of similarity beyond superficial differences. And the key to understand this here is this transformation of many to one from the complex into the simple. This is fundamental to understanding what is going on when scientists, like social scientists and stuff like that, reduce complexity so that they can study a system. It's this many to one transformation. And they're also looking at how it is a homomorphic machine, right? And this is why you have all of these different theories, but they're all roughly the same. And so you can mix and match and stuff like that. That's because the theories of social science or physical science and stuff like that are homomorphic. And they do lead to isomorphism. And so the way to think about this is you have a set of theories, or you have a set of hypotheses. Those hypotheses are reduced into theories, and then they're once again reduced into laws. So we take the complex system of hypotheses and they become simpler and simpler systems until they become laws. So the law of gravity, as an example. So organic complexity. Now, this isn't discussed by Ashby, but this is something that I'm working on in general through the work of Dr. Timothy Petitas and Jane Jacobs. So Ashby contemplates applying these concepts to biological systems. So the inherent organic complexity, which is from Jane Jacobs, means that not only do our models need to be complex enough to understand these systems, but the systems themselves need to be simplified to be studied practically, which is what I was talking about in the previous part. Imagine trying to model an entire forest ecosystem as a black box. The incredible amount of complexity and interrelatedness of species, climate, soil composition, fungus, etc. make it a significant challenge. When we turn our attention to the biological systems, things get even more complex. Again, your body, right? These are examples of what we call complex adaptive systems. They are composed of interacting parts that adapt to their environment based on their interactions. City ecosystems, a topic famously explored by the urbanist Jane Jacobs and also economist and complexity theorist, etc., is a prime example of this. Jacobs argued that cities are a complex system that follow their own organic order with various parts interacting and adapting, creating a dynamic whole. So when it comes to applying our cybernetic concepts to such intricate systems, it's clear that we have to just not elevate our tools, but also find ways to simplify these systems, or at least the representation for practical study. Now, Jane Jacobs and then, Dr. Timothy Petitas, I think that's how you say it. I'm really bad at names. It's Greek, so forgive me. Jane Jacobs says that to reduce the symptoms, we would have to be developed within the system and be a part of the system, like a one-to-one relationship with the system, right? And Dr. Timothy, that's what I'm gonna start calling him, he says that love is the thing which we use to reduce the system's complexity so that we can understand it better and we can get this organic order out of these complex systems. And I think that that's brilliant, and that goes into the work that I'm doing on communal ontology of the free market system. And again, you can see here, we have this ecosystem, we have climate, tree, animal, all these things are totally interrelated and interpenetrated into each other. There's no way to get away from one to the other. All right, observer's discovery. So this is where second order cybernetics comes from. He presents this profound thought. Science isn't just about discovering what the system is, but it's about coordinating various observers' discoveries. It's like observing a fractal. Each zoom level reveals a different truth, each equally valid, though none capture the whole. So the classic Mandelbrot fractal can be endlessly zoomed into, revealing infinite complexity at all levels. Each observer might describe a different part of the fractal, yet all of these observations are part of the whole truth. If you watched my video on Jean Baudrillard, the Matrix, and then how this works with the Cappadocian Fathers in reducing the really real, and that it's like a fractal representation, and that you have the really real, the full pattern is God. We can only see God, we can only communicate, see, etc. God through the energies. We can never know the essence of God because it's beyond essence, it's beyond intellect, etc. And so this is what that is trying to say in scientific terms, is that we have these fractals. We can only see patterns, parts of the whole image, but you can endlessly zoom into it and reveal infinite levels of complexity. And this is what led to second order cybernetics when it come to this realization. And I know a lot of people say that this is very similar to Kant's idea of transcendental idealism, etc. And it doesn't jump too far away, but this was the integration of that. All right, the lattice and models. So a set of state and transformations that persist under a closed system is a lattice. And so if you're looking at this, you're like, wow, this is a checkers board, which by the way is really cool. You're welcome for me making this. So on here. This is essentially a lattice. This is also a model because it's a crucial tool for understanding the system. We have to understand the system of chess through the borders and the boundaries within chess and the rules. So in the terms of lattice, we can consider this chessboard. Regardless of where the pieces are, the board structure remains the same. This provides a stable set of states and transformations allowable on the board, which again, I think that's really cool. So the very large box, memory and emergent problems. Why did this matter? So we have to understand that a very large box is something that is beyond our intellect, right? We can't actually understand what's going on in this box. It is beyond reasoning. But what we do is we use a system's memory and emergent properties. So the memory of a system is the degree to which past states influence future states, while emergent properties are phenomenon that arise from the interactions of the parts of the system that are not predictable from the properties of the individual parts. So a good example of this is really a bee colony, which we're going to jump into here in a moment. But the important thing to think about here when we're looking at all of this is that each individual bee has simple behavior, but when you put thousands of them together, complex behaviors and patterns emerge that aren't evident when looking at a single bee. So this phenomenon is an emergent property of the bee colony as a system, and it's not just about the sum of the parts, it's also about the interaction of the parts. And when we're thinking about this from a memory standpoint, like a system doesn't have memory per se. Memory isn't necessarily a part of the system, but we have this idea of what's called path dependence. If you're walking a path, you're dependent upon the path, and you will have like structural flowing of the path that will lead you to a conclusion. Like you can actually go out in the woods and you can do like dead reckoning when it comes to shooting an azimuth and finding a point, right? And so what that would mean be looking directly at a compass, walking down and like walking a strict direct path. So you're not flowing with the system of the woods. And so you'll like go around, like you'll head into a tree. You'll like walk around the tree, make a box, count your steps right, count your steps forward, count your steps, and then you'll go back on your azimuth. Whereas a lot of people would just not dead reckon. They will actually just, follow the terrain. So it'd be terrain association within walking to find a point from a map. But the problem that they've thought about with terrain association is that some people, as they're following a path, they're going to follow the natural flow of the woods, and that takes them off. And so memory is kind of this standpoint in the system where you have these path dependencies from the previous situation. If I can associate the terrain based on my memory of the map and my memory of where I've been and predict what's going to happen in the future, that makes it a lot easier. But if I can't do that, then I have to use strict sets of rules. So the more memory a system has, the less strict set of rules that it needs. And there's a whole lot that gets jumped into this memory stuff later down the line. I'm not sure if Ashby works on it too much, but when you think about it from the Bayesian perspective, you have like prior distributions that interact with the next set of distributions, and that fundamentally changes like everything about the system that you're working within, because your prior states lead to what's happening in the next state. My light just fell. That was crazy. But anyway, I got totally off track by the light falling. That's cool. So anyway, Bayesian says there's prior, they influence the next set of distributions. This is very similar to path dependence, very similar to memory. In fact, there's been some connection with cubism and quantum choice theory or Bayesian choice theory. And all of this gets really complex very quickly, but this is a good introduction to that anyway. All right, and again, we've got past states, memory, and future states. So you have to reflect on the past states for you to have the future states themselves. All right, so to wrap this up, the black box is a fundamental concept in cybernetics that allows us to simplify and understand the systems based on their inputs, outputs, without needing to know the intricate details or the inner workings. It's an incredibly versatile tool, but one that should be used with the understanding of its limitations that we discussed earlier. So this concludes the exploration of Chapter 6 of Ashby's Introduction to Cybernetics. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments below. In the next video, we're going to be going into variety. This will probably be broken down into 2, maybe 3 videos, just because I want to harp so heavily on Ashby's law of requisite variety, because I think this is fundamental to the understanding of cybernetics, and it's a place where a lot of people miss the mark in trying to understand cybernetics and understand Ashby's work. So I am the Economancer. Once again, thank you so much for joining me, and please like, share, subscribe, comment down below, hit that bell for notifications, and have a good one.